Okay, sorry about, excuse me, sorry about that. So as I was saying, the death penalty, I mean, it's got to be reserved for just a narrow category of killings. And so the example I was thinking is just like Timothy McVeigh or the Boston Marathon bomber. I mean, when you have actual physical evidence that we know it's a cut and dry case, right? You catch the person, you've got them on video surveillance, just all of the details are there. Then those are a lot easier to, justify if you need to the killing versus people where their DNA is withheld. Or it's based on just eyewitness testimony, something like that, that's just kind of shoddy evidence, or even, again, like we just talked about, the coerced confessions. Okay. Page 55, it talks again about this bifurcated system where a death penalty trial is actually two different trials, right? At first, the state must establish that the defendant has committed the act. If the jury finds the defendant guilty, then the second stage, this is where the state puts on evidence and the defendant that the defendant should be executed. All right. This is really what drives up the cost when you think about a death penalty case, because it's not just that one trial where you have all the state witnesses, and the expert testimonies and things like that, but you actually have a whole nother trial where you're bringing back these witnesses, experts that you're having to pay, things like that. Let's see. We have, it talks more about the Martinez case. What is this? On page 81, it looks like Coleman. This story was kind of intriguing. Oh, don't forget to, the Sixth Amendment talks about, it guarantees indigent defendants the right to be represented by effective counsel. Okay. So back to that when we talked about being indigent or poor, right? That poor people, they're allowed by the Sixth Amendment to be able to have representation too. But it says effective counsel. So like I had mentioned earlier, being effective counsel is kind of subjective, because who's to say that just because your attorney falls asleep in court because he's drunk that he or she isn't effective, right? And so just that's not reason enough to get a new trial based on the Sixth Amendment. So that one, it's really a touchy one, and is going to depend on what state you're in, right? And if it goes to the state Supreme Court on whether or not that person, or the Court of Criminal Appeals within that state, to see whether or not that person's going to get a new trial. Okay. And what I find here on the Coleman, in fact, Coleman's lawyer had mailed the notice on the 6th. It was not received until the 7th. However, and because the notice was sent by regular mail, it was not effective and under state law until it was received. So Coleman's notice of appeal under this theory was 1 day late. For want of the price of a registered letter, the state was able to take the position that Coleman's appeal should not be heard. Okay, so back to this, just totally lends itself to the name of the book, Executed on Technicality. So now you've got a man's life, Coleman, who didn't file his appeal, quote, on time. It wasn't sent registered mail. And so it was just regular mail. So the price of $3 now, the court saying, you know what, Coleman, I'm sorry we didn't receive your appeal in time. It's a day late. So I'm sorry, you're just going to die. Okay, so those kind of technicalities, we've got to do something different when you think about, even if you're for the death penalty, how can we change our system so that it's actually fair and just? Would you say that you have to have a hard line in the sand, something like this, that it's worth a man's life to kill him over? Or is there something there? Should there be some kind of gray area there, when a person's life is at stake? Okay. In Texas, this is on page 83, in Texas, nearly 1 in 4 death row inmates was represented by a lawyer who had been reprimanded, placed on probation, suspended, or banned from practicing law by the State Bar of Texas. Okay, so you're looking at least 1 in 4 death row inmates having attorneys that have been suspended or banned or something like that because of their, just their poor representation. All right. Moreover, capital defendants who are represented by lawyers appointed by the state are 28% more likely to be convicted and 44% more likely to be sentenced to death than capital murder defendants who have the resources to retain their own lawyers. Okay, so like I was saying, if you are OJ and you can afford your own attorneys, right, you're going to be better off. And so you get, sadly, poor people who will then try to band together with their families and say, you know what, we've got a mortgage, we've got to get a second mortgage on our home, or we've got to sell our home and sell all of our possessions and take out all these loans, right? Because if we get a public defender, they do shoddy work. And so kind of the theory is if we can hire our own private attorney, we can do better. But sadly, you hire one of these attorneys that are the fly-by-night, that are in these strip malls somewhere who have never represented a death penalty case, and you pay them all your family money and everything that you've gathered up, and they're still shoddy and later on become suspended or barred or something like that. Because they can't handle death penalty cases and they're just, incompetent themselves. All right. So you can definitely see a socioeconomic issue there. Let's see. What else can we find? It says, contemplate that statistic for just one moment. One out of every 4 cases where we know we get it wrong and convicted an innocent man, that man confessed. Okay, so that's just, it says again, approximately 25% of people, the innocent man confessed to the crime. Okay, so out of every 4 that we know of. And we know we get it wrong, right? We end up testing the DNA, or something else comes up. It's normally DNA, but we test the DNA and we know for a fact that we got it wrong, right? 25% of those people actually confess to that crime. So you have to think about those cases where we don't have DNA, right? It came from either a jailhouse snitch or just a confession or an eyewitness or something like that. How many of those are actually innocent as well? Okay. I don't remember this case. I need to revisit this one. On page 98, it talks about Randall Dale Adams got off of death row because of a movie. That's not the one. I know that's not the Netflix movie. He spent 12 years awaiting execution after being convicted of the murder of Robert Wood, a Dallas police officer who was shot 5 times and bled to death on the side of a road in 1976. Adams was not a career criminal, but he was tried for the murder. Let's see. There wasn't any physical evidence, it says, to connect him to the murder. There wasn't a faint hint of any kind of motive. I'm trying to see what they got him for. Unemployed mother, the testimony from 16-year-old David Harris, a career criminal who claimed that he was with Adams at the time of the murder. In exchange, here we go, on page 99, in exchange for providing this damning testimony, Harris, who was ineligible for the death penalty due to his age, okay, so you're looking at a 16-year-old, and that was actually an Oklahoma Supreme Court ruling. I want to say it was Oklahoma versus Thompson, who said that, if anyone is younger than the age of 18 at the time of their crime, they cannot be tried for the death penalty. And so this guy, it looks like Adam was 16 at the time, so he couldn't be charged with the death penalty, testified, and the charges pending against him in another state were mysteriously dropped. Harris's good fortune ran out when he was later convicted of another murder and received the death penalty. And they executed him on 2004. Harris did recant later about the Adams case. So back to that again, when you have, if you got a bone to pick with somebody, you don't like someone, that's kind of one of the easiest ways, even when you think about a jailhouse snitch, or the easiest way to for you to get out of the crime. You just flip and you become state witness and you say, you know what? Yeah, cut me a deal. Yeah, I was there with that guy. Yeah, I saw him do it. Or yeah, we were cellies together and he told me, what he did and how he did it. And sometimes guys are just getting their information from a newspaper or social media details and then saying, yeah, this is what he told me happened. Okay, so sometimes that can happen, and then sadly that person, like it said, your charges can be dismissed somewhere else. You can get a lesser charge, and so you can be given some favoritism if you decide that you want to be a state witness. Let's see. Page 136, it talks about how Judge Hand and Scalia, Supreme Court judges, talk about that executing an innocent man just actually feels wrong. Okay. It's wrong to do. So they're kind of talking about the judges here. It says most mistakes happen in that second trial that we talked about, the trial that determines the actual punishment. Mistakes are rare at the first trial because most defendants did do what the state accused them of doing. Probably more than 90% of all criminal defendants did what the state said they did. But then, after the jury finds a defendant guilty, it has to decide whether the state should execute that defendant. Okay? It tries to show the jurors that the defendant is a human being who possesses qualities worth saving. All right, so kind of talks a little bit about how death warrants right now, especially in Texas, they carry these out after 6 p.m. Okay, so when you just think about the death penalty in general and when these executions happen, used to, back in the day, executions, they were public. They were almost like a carnival, literally. And you can kind of look at some of the old black and white pictures where the guy would be up and he would be up on this wooden pedestal. He would have the sack around his head and the noose, and you would just have hundreds of people from the town standing around watching. Your children would go out there. And it was a way to, in a sense, teach your children kind of this as a deterrent of, hey, kids, you don't want to do that because you could end up like that guy up there, right? And so they thought that when they were public like that, public hangings and executions, that it would serve as a deterrent. But what they noticed is that it backfired on them. And there's what you call the brutalization effect, where they noticed, especially the 3 months right after a public execution, that there were a lot more crimes. And really, it was, the thought is that in society, meaning we, kind of the common folk, we don't want to see people being killed by the state. Right. And so it would just kind of cause other people in society to go out and commit more crime and kind of have this anger for killing one of their own. And so what they did is they started doing executions at night. So even now, when you think about it, when is an execution? Right. It's 12:01 a.m. Or 10:05 p.m., something like that. So it's late at night when people are sleeping. You hardly ever hear about it. So just like I would pose the question to you, if you know when the last time someone was executed in Oklahoma, right? You probably don't, just because we don't publicize it much. We don't put it on the news unless there's some candlelight vigilant where there's a few people standing outside the gates of McAlester when someone dies or they're executed, because we know. The truth is that there is this brutalization effect that happens, and we don't want people now committing crime and there being this huge peak in crime rates. When Timothy McVeigh was executed, we wanted, I say we, in society, people wanted that execution to be live or to be online, and that people could pay like $30 to actually see it happen. And so it went quickly to the Supreme Court to rule and say, no, we're not going to do this. It was highly publicized and people thought, well, it'll serve as a deterrent to other people that are part of militias. Hey, you don't want to do this. And so anyway, the Supreme Court shot it down just because they understand it's not a good idea for society to see someone being put to death. Okay. we kind of piggybacking too off of the video that you watched last week. If you want to watch, someone being put to death, it's something that in Oklahoma, there is actually a lottery where, the victim's family, they get, I don't remember if it's 2 or 3 chairs. The victim's family, they can have 2 or 3 chairs. The media get a few chairs, and then the leftover chairs, there's actually a lottery. And so you would go down and you'd put your name on the list and say, I'd like to watch this execution. And then they would pick a few people. Sorry.